Hi, welcome to this session on creating a structured program in ActionScript 3. What we're going to be looking at today is how we can create an ActionScript program that uses structured programming principles. So what we're going to do is create several functions. One of them is going to be our main program. This is going to call an Initialize function, then an input function, then a processing, and then an output function. So what we're going to use is a button click that's going to call all these for us. We're going to start by creating a couple of layers. It's important to make sure that your AS3 layer or your ActionScript layer, so I'm going to call it ActionScript 3, so we can define that between ActionScript 3 and 2, and the GUI layer. Now, I always put the GUI underneath the ActionScript, always keep my code at the top of my timeline, and it's the top layer. It's just a good programming principle and helps keep things in order. Now, in our ActionScript, we're going to start by opening up our programming panel, and on frame 1 we're actually going to put in a stop marker, stop the playhead from moving if there's multiple frames. Now we're going to use some developer comments in here as well, so the first thing I'm going to do is put in functions, and when we create our functions there's several different ways you can sort of identify them. I like to do it this sort of way, but as I said before, we're going to create a function that's going to be a main program. We're going to have another function called Initialize. We're going to have an input function. We're also going to have a processing function. And we're going to have an output function. Now, one of the other things I always do is put my event listeners at the bottom. So I always have my global variables at the top, and this way I'm able to keep track of where everything is. Now it looks quite confusing at the moment, but we'll go through and we'll pad these out. But one of the first things we need to do is set up our button click. So we need to establish a button so we can then work with the code. So we need a trigger. So what I've done, I've just locked the ActionScript 3 layer. I'm now clicking on the GUI layer, and on the GUI layer I just want to go in and go to user interface, and I'm going to use a default button, drag that out and drop onto the stage. Now this button has some properties. In here I can give it a label name, so I'm just going to put start. We can have it do some different things here, but at the moment just start is quite alright, but we need to give it an instance name. So I'm going to use btn start, and therefore it has a naming convention, and also we know that it's a button because it's btn. Now btn start is going to be what's called an event trigger. If I don't delete it out up there, so I'm just going to put it back in there, sorry. btn start. You also notice that the btn is lowercase and the first word starts with a capital. And when I go back to my coding now, I'll be able to create an event listener for that. So we need to use the object name btn start dot, and then we can add event listener, and we need to go, well, what are we listening for? We're listening for a mouse event, and in particular, what event are we looking or listening for? We're listening for a click. Now once I've done that, I can then use a comma and call a function. Now when we call a function, we always start with the prefix f, therefore it indicates it as a function, distinguishes it under Hungarian notation from other different types of variables and reserved words. And we're going to call main, and if you want to, you can go main program. So this program, this event listener, will call main program when it is clicked. So as we head up to our functions list here, we've got a area set up for main program, and what we need to do now is declare this function. Now to do this, we need to set up a different sort of function call, which actually uses an event. So we're going to use a function, and we need to give it a name. So in this case, function fMainProgram. You notice I copy and paste that so I get less typing errors. And we're listening for a particular event. In this case, it is a mouse event. So this hands on the mouse event, so the click goes to this function. And then I can open up a brace. Now in here, I can actually then set a trace statement to say in main program. Now this helps developers know where they are in the code as they go through, and if there's a crash, they can look at their trace statements and realize, oh, the last place I was here, therefore the error must occur in there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to run the program. I'm not going to go any further until I know that button calls calling. So when I click on start, I should get a trace output that actually says in main program. So I know that my event listener is working. Now what I wanted to do from that was actually start creating some other programs. The next one is Initialize. Now function Initialize is a little bit different. Because it's going to be called from our main program, we actually don't have to set any parameters. So we can actually go function. We can actually go function Initialize and then bracket, bracket, open brace, close brace. And I'm just going to copy this trace statement down, just alter this and put in here in Initialize. So I'm in Initialize, and therefore I need to now call this function. At the moment, main program, all it does is trace. If I want this to call function Initialize, I can just call it, not by doing that, I can just call it by calling the function Initialize bracket bracket. So I'm just going to copy that up to here. I'm going to paste that in. So when I click the button, it calls this function. It then traces the information. Then it calls function Initialize. It then goes down to run function Initialize. It should trace function Initialize. And then once it's finished running function Initialize, would return back to main program. And if we want to make sure it comes back here, I can actually put a trace statement in here and say finish. That way we know the program's finished. So it will come in the main program, trace, leave this function, go into this function, trace out in Initialize, return back to here, and then run the next line, which is finish, and then the program should end. So let's have a look at that in a runtime environment. We hit start. There we go, in main program, in Initialize, and then finish. So we can see how the program's flowing together. Now once we've done that, we can actually then create input, etc. So what I'm going to do, we need to call the function. So I'm just going to go f input, bracket, bracket. We also have f process, bracket, bracket. And we also have f output. So now what we need to do is just create those functions. So I'm just going to go copy the first one. We know this is going underneath input, so I can come in here and go in input. I can then do processing, and then I can do output. Now if everything's done correctly, I should be able to run this and see all the information, but I've actually got a mistake in there. So we go back into the program, we can actually see f process, and I've actually got process. So we get rid of this. So now when I run it, oh, it's all run and compiled correctly. I hit start, in main program, in Initialize, in input, in processing, in output, and then we finished. So what we've just done then is created a structured program in ActionScript 3 ready for us to use and collect information from the user and carry out the operations that we need.